Thank you very much for your warm welcome. My name is Nicole Bürli, and I'm a senior human rights advisor with the World Organization Against Torture, or OMCT for short. We are a global civil society network that fights torture worldwide, and we have more than 200 network members around the globe and several also in India. And our main office is in Geneva. I would like to start by congratulating the organizers for this very important event that touches upon so many important conversations with very distinguished speakers, and I'm very honored to be part of this event, and I thank the organizers for having me. I was asked to talk about the prohibition of torture. As you might know, Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And the ban on torture is another reflection of the revulsion against Nazi concentration camps in Germany and the Nazi medical experiments on living people that motivated the drafters of the Universal Declaration after the Second World War to include a prohibition of torture into the Universal Declaration. And while at that time there was no agreement as to the exact definition of torture, as to what torture actually is, how to really legally define it, there was a consensus that it needs to be integrated into the Universal Declaration. We can thus say that the prohibition of torture is a core issue in the broader human rights regime. And from the Universal Declaration, a wealth of normative standards and institutional mechanisms have emerged to give effect to the prohibition of torture and ill treatment, and most notably the UN Convention Against Torture, or CAT, as we call it for short. This was enacted on 10th December 1984. So next year it will celebrate its 40 years. I want to say just a very few words how this CAT convention came about. As you can imagine, despite the Universal Declaration, torture continued to be systematically practiced in many parts of the world. Well-known and documented cases during the 1960s and 70s included the French practices in Algeria or the Portuguese practices in its former African colonies, also those under Latin American military dictatorships. Increasing reports of torture and massive ill treatment from many parts of the world made Amnesty International launch a worldwide campaign against torture, actually on the Human Rights Day in December in 1972. And so most notorious at that time were the cruel methods of torture practiced by the military junta in Chile by Augusto Pinochet, who had just outthrown the democratically elected government in Chile. And these widely documented cases of torture and forced disappearances were really a starting point of a number of far-reaching measures. And there was willingness among states to enact a separate treaty that would fight torture. India was actually part of the drafting. In fact, the rapporteur for the working group that drafted the convention was an Indian diplomat, a woman who was also a known writer at the time. Once the convention text was adopted, India then also signed it. But unfortunately, India did not ratify the treaty, meaning it did not do the necessary internal domestic steps to make this international treaty part of its law. And India is not bound by this treaty, is not part of this treaty. And this is also what we mean by ratifying, or when we say ratify a treaty, it means it is binding to a country. And India is one of the 20 states that has not ratified it. The vast majority, 173 states to be exact, have ratified the convention. In the following, I would like to highlight just a very few points why I think it is important that India ratifies the UN Convention Against Torture. First of all, ratification sends a very powerful message that the ratifying state and the international community are united in their conviction that torture can never be tolerated under any circumstances. It is seen as a worldwide effort, and states ratify to be part of those nations that condemn torture. So it therefore does not matter whether a country has a systematic problem with torture or not. So CAT ratification and the criminalization of torture is essential. And this is exactly the reason why, for instance, also my country, Switzerland, or a small country like Liechtenstein has ratified the convention in 1990. I don't know if you have heard of the country Liechtenstein. It is a very small country between Switzerland and Austria. It has only about 40,000 inhabitants. It has one prison. It can host a maximum of 20 people. It usually hosts about 10 people at not more than 10 people at any time. And it is not a country that has systematic torture issues, but it has ratified the convention because it wants to be part of the community of states that condemn torture. And of course, there are also big states that have ratified the convention, like China or Russia, or states with very systematic torture issues. And when I said before that ratifying the convention sends a powerful message to the international community, you can imagine the message India would send to the region, to the world, when ratifying is of course much bigger than the message a country like Liechtenstein, no sense, because India is geopolitically one of the most important countries in Asia. It's a country that has a pioneering role in many areas, and hence many states are looking for guidance towards India. And there's another reason I want to highlight. The Convention Against Torture does not only address torture as such, so not just the violence inflicted on a detainee in custody. Now, this is what we typically think of when we hear torture. It also addresses circumstances that increase the risk of torture. And what do I mean by this? Well, if a country, even a small one, with just one prison, has very old facilities where basic hygiene can no longer be guaranteed, for instance, or where detainees do not have sufficient space in their cell or in a courtyard, the risk that detention standards are inhuman or degrading is increased. And similar considerations apply to legislation. The convention also addresses, for instance, criminal laws and regulations in place, like access to court of detainees, access to a lawyer, or how long does it take for a case to be heard, and so on. And it are again circumstances which can increase the risk of torture. Thus, being part of the convention system is also a chance for a country to review its rules and regulation. And of course, it is important for those countries where torture and other ill treatment is very frequently reported, and where prosecution and the justice system is not well functioning, which is the case in many South Asian countries. As I said, India has not ratified the CAT. Ever since signing the convention, there have been multiple efforts by civil society organizations, member of parliament, and the judiciary, urging the government to ratify the convention. And in 2017, the Law Commission of India published a report on the implementation of the convention and recommended actually that the government ratify the convention and also enact a standalone torture law. So far, unfortunately, there has not been such legislation. And something I want to add here, and this is my last point, is there's sometimes a misconception that states need to fully comply with a treaty before they can ratify it, meaning that they have to have all the laws in place, all rules compliant with the convention. It is an argument we often hear from states that have not ratified the convention, but in fact, this is not necessary. Ratification is not the end of a process. It can as well be the beginning. States that do prepare for ratification typically carry out the stock taking of national laws and policies, and often they see that they already comply with several obligations. I'm going to stop here. I hope I was able to give you some food for thought on why it's important to fight torture and why it's important that India ratifies the CAT Convention. Do not hesitate to reach out to the OMCT to look at our website if you would like to have more information. And once again, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for putting this important event together. Thank you and goodbye.